Blog Talk. Hello and welcome to Awakenings. That was a bit of Sospiro by Bardo State. Wonderful piece of music there. Welcome all to the program. It's great to see all of you here and have all of you here. I'm your host, and as I like to say, co-pilot, Michele Meiche. And I hope your Wednesday is going wonderful. If you have just surfed in or tuned in to Awakenings, I'll tell you a little bit about the program. Awakenings Radio is a place where we bridge science, spirituality, and art. It's a place for meaningful discussions and dialogues with people that are living awake or awakened and taking this awakened state into their everyday lives. We interview authors, teachers, metaphysicians, scientists, musicians, all people that are at the cutting edge of their field and sharing their insight and understanding with the world. So it's also a place for a timely relaying of insight and information, and also a place for inspiration and to get that information or cutting edge information or research that can help you on your life path. And it's also a wonderful community. If you'd like to connect with us via email, the email is awakenings@selfandlight.com, and of course we have the Awakenings page on Facebook as well, a wonderful community of awakened listeners. And it's always wonderful to connect with all of you. If you are here for the first time, I do see some guests in the chat room as well. And you would like to interact or ask questions via the chat room, all you need to do is, if you are registered with Blog Talk Radio, just sign in. But if you are a guest, all you need to do is register, and that is at the bottom of the chat. You'll either see sign in or register, and all that's needed is your name and email address, and then you can interact. If you do have questions in the chat room, just not necessary but can be helpful to type in caps so that I can see it more readily. And those of you listening via phone and iTunes and the other podcast stations, and of course we stream also live via Cosmic Dimensions. I want to say hello to all of you as well. And the call-in number, if you are choosing to listen by phone, is 347-539-5122. And if you press 1 on the keypad, then I will know that you have a question or a comment, and we'd love to hear from you. Always love to hear from you. So I have a wonderful program today as well, and always have some great guests on the program that I learn a lot. So I selfishly love doing this program because I get to meet some wonderful people as well. We have with us today Dr. Larry Dossey, and he's the best-selling author, physician, editor, and lecturer. He's held advisory positions to Hillary Clinton's task force on health care, as well as to the National Institutes of Health. Many consider Dr. Dossey one of the greatest medical sages. Others have coined him as the world's leading expert in space-time mystery. And also he's been noted to be, in his clear, crystal clear style, to be able to relay perhaps seemingly divergent views and bring those together, or what seems not explainable to explain that. His recent book is The Science of Premonitions, How Knowing the Future Can Help Us Avoid Danger, Maximize Opportunities, and Create a Better Life. I want to welcome to the program Dr. Dossey. Hello, Dr. Dossey.
Hello, Michele. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's great. Wonderful to have you back on the program. I love your books because you do, as I said in the intro, tend to take differing views and bring them together, or help the reader weigh what is being presented to them, and also to bring in ideas or ideology that people, may scoff, like you did so wonderfully also with Recovering Your Soul and the other books that you've done on the power of prayer or healing or intention. What brought you to, I would say, just for the little bit for the listeners, to this ability, and even I would say even to this maybe gift or maybe propensity to want to do this, to do the research, to bring perhaps what people either scoff at or say, well, there is no background and there is no science to validate that. You somehow are able to put the research together and do the tests and the studies to get the science. And what do you feel calls you to do this, I guess?
Well, it goes back quite a ways. In my first year in medical practice, began to tackle, just for my own edification and understanding, some topics that were floating around in science and medicine, which were extremely complex. This goes back into the late 70s, really. Back in those days, there were a great many ideas that were coming out of physics. Just to take one example, no one knew what quantum physics was. It was just a buzzword, and it was shrouded in mystery. Also, there was a hot topic called systems theory going around in those days, and there were new areas of medical science which were popping up, which had to do with consciousness. This was the advent, for example, of the biofeedback era. And people were doing, I don't know if you remember it back in those days, but that was really mysterious. A lot of people thought it was satanic or demonic or something,
The biofeedback? They did?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And meditation began to garner some attention. But back in those days, very few people felt comfortable with those things. I had this inner notion that these topics were going to be very important in medicine in the years ahead. And I began to pick these topics apart one by one and write essays for myself. I had no intentions of publishing these things. I just wanted to work through them and try to understand them.
Oh.
And actually, they grew into a book, Michele. This stack of little essays for myself got thicker and thicker, and finally it turned into my first book, a book called Space, Time, and Medicine, which is still in print and was published in 1982. So I love to do that. I love to take a complex idea that's difficult to explain and try to reduce it to simple, understandable, and communicable language. And that's just what I've continued to do over the course of 11 books.
Now, what's interesting? It's like you had your own premonition that this type of, right? Way back when.
Well, that's true. That's right. I did have a brief.
Yeah. So really it started, I love this, because it really started from your love of this study and your own interest. And if I could ask you, what were you, back then when you first started, were you trying to prove anything, or you just wanted to know more about it?
I was just trying to work it out for myself. The last thing in my mind was publishing a book. I didn't, a lot of us, before we start publishing, we don't really conceive ourselves to be authors. We've never published a book. I mean, and it burst on me as kind of a surprise that, I looked at these essays and I thought, well, that sort of looks like a book. And so I
you have 11 books, right? Didn't you say that, 11?
Yeah, that's working on my
12th
right now. Yeah. So, that process has continued. I hear authors all the time say writing is just a huge chore. They get writer's block, and it's just like, pulling teeth to sit down in front of a word processor for them. I've never experienced that. I love the process. And I love to take a difficult topic and plunge into it and see what it will reveal to me. For me, a book gets written in the process. I don't really see a book shaped up at the time I start to write it, but it reveals itself to me, and it's almost a mystical pursuit to me. You have to put aside your ego and stop trying to force the book to do what you want it to do, and let it show itself to you on its own terms. At least that's sort of been my experience.
Well, maybe it's that exploratory and questioning approach, maybe because it seems like when we approach anything that way, it kind of opens the tap more,
Well, I certainly believe that. I think there's really a lot to that. I think the way to doom a book is just to try to force it into a straitjacket, and that way the book will never speak to you. You're putting your trip on it when it should work the other way around, in my judgment.
Mm-hmm. Good point. And actually, I think some good advice for aspiring writers as well that are listening. Now, you've studied prayer, you've studied healing, you've studied non-specified prayer, non-specified healing. So you kind of brought a face, I feel, in the field to that, and some good research, and science behind that. And now you've turned to, and I want to get your take on the difference, what you feel is premonition, a type of intuition, or is there a difference? But now you've turned your focus for a while, and actually with the previous book, right, The Power of Premonitions, and now you have The Science of Premonitions. What was the impetus for you to focus on premonition, and I would also say intuition?
Sure. Well, personal experience. The first year I was in medical practice, I had a series of what turned out to be prophetic dreams, what are called precognitive dreams or dream premonitions of extremely complex clinical happenings that got played out the day following the dream. One of these I describe in the book, The Power of Premonitions, and it had to do with one of my colleagues' young sons. He was about 4 years old. I dreamed that this child underwent a complex series of events the next day, and it had to do with a brainwave test, an EEG test that he would have the next day, and the test just actually had to be abandoned because he was just such an unruly little kid. He was frightened, scared to death, and he just made it impossible to complete the test. I dreamt all this the night before. I had no idea. I hardly knew this kid. My wife and I had seen him only about 3 times, and there was no reason I would dream this thing.
Yeah.
But this got played out.
He just popped in? He just popped in your...
Just popped in.
Wow.
It didn't make any sense on the surface. There was no reason why I would dream this thing. And then I had several of those in the following month, and they really upset my worldview. I mean, I was a no-nonsense doctor back then. I knew this. You couldn't know the future before it happened. I mean, the world just didn't work like that, but there it was. And so I dealt with that, and with the technique that I'm really good at. It's called denial. I tried to just deny that this had happened, and that they kept happening. Besides that, my patients began to tell me their dreams that about upcoming health problems, and word got around I was sort of interested in this stuff, and then nurses began to tell me their experience with premonitions about things that would play out on the nursing floors in the hospital after they had the premonition. And I just sort of couldn't get away from these things. I just sort of squirreled them away and made a few notes over the years. And then when the science and the actual experiments began to pop up a few years back, confirming that we do have a sense of premonition, and sure enough, even when you test it, people can show that they can intuit and know the future. I thought, well, it's time to do a book on this. I mean, here you have not just people's stories, but actual experiments confirming this sense that most people seem to have, and I thought it was time to go forward with a book. So there you are.
Wow. Now, the premonitions that people were having, let's say the nurses, was it about patients, or was it just people in general in their life?
It was about patients. Let me share one of these with you, if you don't mind.
Okay. No, I'd love to.
Yeah, this had to do with a first-year nurse. She was fresh out of nursing school, and she had a dream one night in which she saw this little boy. The dream was that she was working on the nursing floor, and someone told her to go down to the lobby where she would find a sick little boy. He would be in pink and white and blue pajamas, and he would look really ill, and she was to help him get admitted without any hassle. And so this was one of the most vivid dreams she said she'd ever had in her life. This was actually written up in a nursing journal recently. So she goes to work the next morning after having this dream, and it was so profound for her. The first thing she did was to seek out her nursing supervisor and relate the dream to her supervisor. While she was doing that, the phone rings on the nursing station, and someone tells her to go down to the lobby where she will see a sick-looking little boy. He will be in pink and white and blue pajamas. And so she does this. She does go down to the lobby, and she sees the little boy in her dreams, and she helps him get admitted. And unfortunately, this little boy really is sick, and he died about 3 days later. So this is the sort of precision that you see in some of these dreams that are health-related. Nurses are just a rich source of these things. I happen to be married to a nurse and for about 30 years, and this is common stuff around nurses. They really don't struggle with this sort of thing the way doctors do a lot of times. And so nurses have been great informers and sources of information for me and researching this area of premonitions.
You remind me, Dr. Dossey, years ago talking to someone about spirits and people crossing. It was a nurse, and talking about having, seen spirits or felt their presence or leaving. And she looked. She said, "Oh, we see that all the time." She's like, "We see that all the time."
So what's the
she
big
just
deal?
waved me away. Yeah, she's like, "Yeah, we were." We see that death and day. We know. Yeah, and they'll come back and they'll let us know. I'm like, "Oh, okay."
You got time for another one?
Yes, definitely.
Well, this has to do with a patient, and this was related to me when I was on book tour up in the Seattle area. After I gave a talk about this subject in a bookstore, a woman came up to me and she said, "I want to tell you a premonition that my husband was involved with. He was a family physician, and one of his patients came to him one morning and said, I have breast cancer. I know I have because I had a dream last night, and I saw that it's right here." And she took her index finger and pointed to a specific spot in her breast, and she says, "So I want you to help me deal with this." So they did a breast exam. The breast exam was totally normal. They did a mammogram. The mammogram was normal. And he tried to reassure her and say, "We'll just do frequent exams and periodic mammograms." But she said, "No, I want a breast biopsy. I have breast cancer." So she sort of bullied this doctor into referring her to a breast surgeon. And the surgeon said, "Well, where am I going to biopsy? There's nothing to biopsy." And the first doctor said, "Well, I don't know where you're going to biopsy. Just biopsy where she points, I guess." So he did, and sent the tissue to the pathologist. The pathologist calls the first doctor back in about a week with the report, and he says, "How in the world did you find this? This is the most microscopic breast cancer I've ever seen. It wouldn't have left a lump. It wouldn't have caused any abnormality on the mammogram. How did you find this?" And to his great credit, this first doctor said, "Well, I didn't find it. She did in a dream." So these dream premonitions are, they're so often health-related. They warn us of things we need to know about that are a threat to our survival, and that's a classic example.
Now, we have a couple questions, email and also in the chat room, Dr. Dossey. One is, you almost answered that, are most of the premonitions about something bad or warning us?
That's a great question. The answer is yes, they seem mostly to be about things that are challenges or threats to our health, but not always. People have premonitions about nice things, too. It's very common to have a premonition about an approaching pregnancy, for example. That's very common. People have premonitions of where the last remaining parking spot is in, downtown Chicago or somewhere. I mean, nice things to know about. You just sort of have an intuition or a hunch, and it happens. I have several cases of people who have had dreams of winning lottery numbers and have entered them and have won. I have one case of a young man who had a dream about where the slot machine in Las Vegas was going to be that would pay him the jackpot. He found this single slot machine, and it happened. And it was not in the hotel which he was going to stay at. It was somewhere else, and he clearly saw it in a dream, and it turned out that way. So the dramatic premonitions that you read and hear about usually have to do with, warnings about something horrible, like breast cancer that I mentioned. But not always. They're, they come in all flavors, including positive forms.
And another one is, do most of them come in dream form, or all of them come in dream form, or is it possible to have a premonition in another way?
Well, people have premonitions, when they're wide awake. So it's not always in a dream form. Again, ones that come in dreams are the ones that, people always like to talk about because they're so dramatic. But not always. Frequently people just have waking hunches, or they often call them intuition, but I can't separate intuition from premonitions, really.
Okay, that was the next question. They're asking, what's the difference between the two? Is there? Do you consider there a distance?
Well, I think that they're so related that it really is almost impossible to tease them apart, and I really don't make an attempt to do that. Fact is, a lot of people are more comfortable with the term intuition than they are premonitions. Premonitions reminds people of parapsychology and ESP and on, and they can be uncomfortable with that, so they just feel better calling them intuition. This is particularly true in the business world. Businessmen who really just have a profound sense of how to, for example, chart business moves, whether it's investment opportunities of various sorts or stock market movements up or down. And so a lot of them call that just good business sense or business intuition. Rarely will they call it premonitions. But what it is just some uncanny sense of knowing what's going to happen ahead of time. Whether we call that premonitions or intuitions, I just really could care less.
But the premonition, because I was reading in your book, what is it, coming from Latin? I don't recall now, but it does intimate that it's happening before something.
That's
so
exactly
before the activity, right?
Yeah, it comes from a Latin word, and the Latin word really means a forewarning, the warning that comes before. So it gives you a hint, that if you're going to be warned about something, that's suggestive it's kind of bad or malevolent or a threat or something, if you have to be warned about it. And that's true for a lot of premonitions, as we've been saying, but not always, I'm happy to report.
Yeah, I like that you say that it could be presage something that is great, which watch those lottery numbers. I actually had some with lottery numbers. I asked the wrong person. They said you needed all 5 to win, and I had 4 numbers. And did win something, but didn't find out till 2 days after 1 year, because they only give you 1 year. Those you can get numbers, in your dreams. Also, Dr. Dossey, do you feel that people somehow call this in, or are certain people more open to this?
Yeah, I think that you can set the stage for this, and if you're friendly toward the idea and open to it, it's certainly much more likely to happen. And when it does happen, you're much more likely to recognize it. On the other hand, if you really are hostile toward this stuff, it'll be more difficult for you to have a premonition. Or if you do experience one, you're likely to set it aside as nonsense and simply deny it and shove it off into the unconscious or forget about it. Also, Michele, there are prodigies in this. There are some people who, are gifted with this stuff. I'm not sure that should be surprising because in almost any area of human endeavor, there are people who are just head and shoulders above the rest of us. For example, in mathematics or athletics or art or music and so on. Some people really have talent in those areas. I think this is true also for premonitions. Also, a lot of people object to this sometimes because they think it's irreligious. There still is a social stigma in some circles, right, about this stuff. Some people continue to think it's sort of satanic. But I challenge that. If you go back and look in the Bible, they used to call this stuff prophecy, and nobody, bats an eyelash about that. But that's knowing the future. So I don't think people need to get bent out of shape about religious issues with premonitions, but it does continue to come up.
Yeah, it does. Now, we have an interesting kind of comment from the chat from Debbie. And she's saying, I guess when she was 16 years old, she had a dream that something bad was going to happen to her boyfriend the next day, and it turned out he was in a car accident. And I believe there was something about a accident, some type of accident in the dream. But then she said she had something years later. Let's see. Oh, when she was 16, she woke up at 12:15 a.m. knowing that her boyfriend was in trouble. The next day called him and said at that exact time he was in a car accident at 12:15 a.m. But then years later, she said she had, or about a year ago, she just knew her husband and they were going to die in an accident, and it didn't happen. And it was a very, very strong feeling. So how can one tell the difference? Because sometimes you do have these dreams that seem so real and are very strong that something's going to happen, and it doesn't happen.
Right. Well, there's some criteria that we can use to separate those that are likely to pan out and those which don't. But I would hasten to say that has never been a way that has 100% predictability to do this. We have to do the best we can. So how can we refine what we make of these things? I think, first of all, you mentioned one quality, and that's the vividness of it. People who experience these things turning out often say that this was the most vivid dream I've ever had in my life. I was just overcome with certainty. One woman told me that those dreams that turn out to be true seem lit up from the inside. One woman said the ones that are true come to me in italics. In other words, these people are saying there's some special quality that they learn to identify that separates the dreams and premonitions that come to be true from those that are just fantasy. So the vividness is one criteria. Another is whether or not they're recurrent. I talk in the book about recurrent dreams that night after night just pester people. They just won't leave them alone, as if the dream is demanding to be heard. That's a really good criterion to use. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, said that also if a dream is about death, it should be taken seriously because the individual may not get a second chance. So if they deal with death, if they're really vivid and if they're recurrent, they should, we should give them a heads up. Doesn't mean that that's going to be a 100% accurate way to predict things, but it helps. And also, a criterion that's really a good one is that if somebody else begins to share your premonition. In the book, I talk about a couple who independently, living in New York City and Manhattan, began to dream that these towers were falling and people were jumping out of windows, and these were the World Trade Center towers in the dream, and the husband actually worked in the bottom floor of one of these towers. And so they discovered that they were having this independent dream just by accident. And so they compared the dream. It was identical for both of them. They were very intellectual people, and they thought this was just nonsense, that dreams don't foretell anything. And unfortunately, he died on 9/11 when the towers came down. And so just to say that if you begin to, if you discover that somebody is dreaming along with you about something identical,
like that,
that's a huge, huge clue.
Huge words. Now, it's interesting you talk about the 9/11, and I guess as we're talking, I'm thinking that what I had would be considered a premonition. 2 weeks beforehand, and I was to be traveling, I think 9, 10, or 10, 11, 12, 13th of September, and back east, and I kept having all these dreams of planes blowing up and being sucked out of the plane. And some of my well-meaning friends kept saying, well, you must be under a lot of stress or you don't like to fly. I was like, no, I love to fly. I couldn't figure it out. But I woke up in such terror that I ended up postponing my plans. I just said, you know what, and I didn't even know why. It didn't even make sense. And it actually was for some kind of speaking thing that had been set up, but something told me, and I thought, well, worst case scenario, maybe I'm going to have a panic attack on the plane,
Yeah. Well,
and
I think this is worth talking about because one of the really surprising things I stumbled onto in researching this book is a misconception that most Americans have about what actually happened on 9/11 to those 4 doomed planes. A lot of us carried around these images that 4 jam-packed full passenger jets went down that day, and it wasn't that way. These planes were on average 80% empty. They were only 20% full. This is very strange. A lot of people apparently found some reason not to travel that day. So it makes you wonder how common these unconscious premonitions of disaster are in travelers. We really do need a lot more research on this. I don't know about you, but I travel a lot. I fly a lot, and I just don't get on planes that are only 20% full.
No,
so
I've never.
All 4 of those planes, I think the range was 74 to 84% empty, but the average was right at 79, 80% empty for all 4 planes. This is very, very strange. If you go to, if you Google dreams of 9/11, you come up with millions of hits. I spent days looking on YouTube. A lot of people have posted their premonitions and dreams of 9/11 on YouTube. Some of them are so accurate it just makes the hair stand on end.
Yeah.
So this is not uncommon, dreams of disasters.
And I'm wondering, too, because I know some people had the premonition the day of, or just something else coming in that they decided to do something else. Mine was like 2 weeks before, which kind of, I always wondered, I wonder if it's like a destiny thing, if they were in planning. Is it just in the ethers floating around and then people get that? What's your idea of that? I mean, where do the premonitions come from? Yeah.
I wish I knew. All I can do is offer theories, and as I do in the book, and I think some of them, one of these days, are going to turn out to be true. I'm just not sure which one. The ones that really interest me is that ideas of this. This sounds very complicated and hopelessly complex, but physicists talk about time or closed time-like loops. In which events that are in the future can, like a roller coaster, come back into the present and bring information from the future back into the present, forming a kind of time loop so that you can gain information about what is going to happen when it flows backwards from the future to the present. Now, this may sound absolutely California woo-woo. I would just say, however, that hotshot physicists and mathematicians take this very seriously as a model of time. And there are many other models and images in which information can flow from the future back into the present. There's an idea called the block universe theory. These are all wrapped up in mathematical equations and so on, which is to say that serious scientists consider them seriously. So there's no prohibition in modern physics for information to be gained before an event happens. That's completely allowed within modern physics. Whether or not it's true or inaccurate or not, or whether we'll have to wait for another theory to come along that may be more accurate and precise, time will tell. But the point I want to make is that our common sense idea that events flow only in one direction, out of the past into the present and into the future, that idea has just been discarded by modern science. We know that time doesn't work like that. It doesn't flow in only one direction. As a matter of fact, there's no evidence that it flows at all. So nonetheless, that's our common sense idea, and it creates difficulty because that is common sense. We really resist this idea that we can know the future. But that resistance really doesn't exist in modern physics. It's completely acceptable that we might just know the future.
And would it be seen as it was in this loop, like a continuum?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
This whole idea of time is really tricky, and the problem for us is that we think we know how time operates, and it operates according to common sense. It only flows in one direction. That's just flat out wrong from the perspective of modern science. We need to get over that. If we could get over that, we could be more open to these talents that we have, these abilities to sense the future, because we'd take them seriously. They would all of a sudden seem possible, not so strange. And we might be able to reclaim a bigger piece of who we are as human beings if we could make that change.
If we would open to that. Yep. And you speak of something in the book, you chart, and I myself have done a non-scientific experimentation with this, pets, and specifically dogs. Cats do this as well. But there's been research, and you listed in your book, cited in your book, about how dogs can know when their owners or companions are coming home. Even if they vary their time, they know.
Right. I think most dog owners really would not raise an eyebrow about this. Pets are often right at the door when they come in. I really follow the research of Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, a British biologist who wrote a book about dogs who know when their owners are coming home. He videoed dogs from morning to night, and the owners would try to fake the dogs out by coming home at odd hours, by different methods of transportation, automobiles, trucks, walking, bicycles. Nothing worked. The animals knew. I think that this, as I mentioned, would not shock a lot of pet owners. And also, in the book, I talk about Oscar the cat, who overnight became the most famous cat in the world when Oscar's story was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most famous medical journals in the world. Oscar was the pet of this neurological unit where patients with dementia and Alzheimer's spent their last days up in the Northeast. And Oscar, about 2 hours before people would die, he would always go and curl up on their bed. In 21 straight deaths, he never missed a death. And the neurologist on that unit wrote this story up and had it published, oddly enough, in this famous medical journal. This was about 3 years ago. I was fascinated with Oscar. If people Google Oscar the cat, you can actually come up with videos of Oscar doing his thing. Oscar's a beautiful cat, by the way, and they just love him to death on this neurological unit. The nurses do, and he's their their prophet. I mean, he never misses a death. So, the skeptics, weren't impressed with this, and the letters to the editor in the journal where the story appeared, almost everybody said, well, cats have a good sense of smell, and maybe people before they die begin to give off odors, and Oscar senses this, and that's it. No one was willing to suggest that Oscar, like the dogs that Dr. Sheldrake researched, Oscar might be able to sense what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's in your book as well, and then we have a question from Light in the chat room about dogs predicting earthquakes or knowing. Maybe, I don't know if it's having a prediction or a premonition.
Yeah.
Would that be in the same vein here?
It may be. I'm not sure about it. A lot of people remember, 4 or 5 years ago, the tragic tsunami in Southeast Asia, where it was widely reported that elephants and all sorts of animals left the coastal areas for higher ground hours before the tsunami hit. I don't know if this is an example of animals knowing what's going to happen, or if they just have some super sense of
something wrong or off. Okay.
Tremors and the ground,
right.
Something of that sort. There has been a great deal of attention paid to that event because these animal behaviors were just absolutely sensational and dramatic. They just knew somewhere or other that disaster was about to happen. I'll leave that open. I think we can marvel at that, but I don't know whether which way to go with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, in part of it, what I'm hearing from you is that the research that you're doing is, it seems to be quantifiable, and I guess with the running dogs, you don't really know. And I guess like with the research Rupert Sheldrake did also, the video was there, and they could, monitor and, make some conclusions in that way.
But let me mention, if I might, Michele, my favorite piece of evidence, since we're talking about evidence for this, it has to do with computer-based experiments that Dr. Dean Radin and many other researchers have replicated, showing that we can really know the future. And these are examples of people sitting in front of a computer, and they're being monitored to have some measurement made of what their body's doing. For instance, their blood pressure or their skin resistance, or some index of stress activity in the body is being measured. The deal is that the computer is going to show you an image in a minute or so, and you don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be one of two types. It's either going to be a very peaceful, lovely, calm image like a scene from nature, or it's going to be something really violent, like an autopsy scene or horrible trauma, something like that. So you're sitting there waiting for the image to pop up, not knowing which random choice the computer's going to make. Here's the deal, and this is where this gets really weird. If the image that you're going to see is one of these violent, horrible things, your body begins to generate an exaggerated stress response before that image even happens, before it even shows up on the computer, and before the computer even decides itself which one it's going to show you. How does your body and your unconscious mind know that ahead of time? It clearly does, because it behaves differently. Your body doesn't do that if the image that's going to show up is one of those peaceful things. Almost all of the dozens of experiments around the world that have looked at this have come to the same conclusion. This is extremely interesting. I don't think there's any way to interpret except to say that somehow we unconsciously know the future. Somehow your body knows, and you can tell that by this exaggerated stress response.
So if I'm hearing you right, in some way it's almost we're getting the information in another way, definitely beyond cognitive thinking.
It has nothing to do with cognitive thinking.
No, at all.
And it
so some way we're absorbing that information or we're receiving that information through some channel, perhaps in the body. I don't,
Well, we don't know how. We don't understand the mechanism of this. My favorite term is something unknown is doing we don't know what. That's a famous saying from Sir Arthur Eddington about something entirely different, but I like to use it.
Yeah, but it applies here.
This has nothing to do with the senses, see, taste, feel, touch, and all of that. It bypasses the senses. These experiments, like Dr. Radin has been doing, which I just mentioned, clearly show that this is an unconscious sort of thing. You consciously don't know it's happening, but somehow your unconscious picks up this information and reflects it in the body. And it's extremely reliable in these experiments, and it's extremely widespread. I'm not talking about just a random occasional person being able to do this on these experiments. Most people who hook up to these computers and do this experiment are able to do this. So this is very, very widespread.
Widespread. Now, we did have another question. For some reason, a lot of email and chat questions. I'm just going to give the phone lines again. If 347-539-5122. If you do have a question, just press 1 on the keypad, and I will know you have a question. We do have a question from one of the listeners that, what if they don't believe? They're not. Do these happen to people that don't believe?
Absolutely. You don't have to be a believer.
Okay.
Belief enhances the frequency of the experiment, as I've implied earlier. But a lot of skeptics have these sorts of things. Think back to that example I gave of the husband and wife who had this very accurate premonition that the Twin Towers were going to fall. They didn't believe it. They were absolute skeptics about this. They thought premonitions were nonsense. And he died in the 9/11 tragedy at the Twin Towers. So you can be skeptical and you can still have premonitions. However, if you are a believer, that is one of the factors which makes people more premonition prone. I don't know if the act of believing actually makes them more common. It may simply enable you to simply pay attention and acknowledge them when they happen, if you happen to be open to the possibility.
Mm-hmm. And what about, you talk about the repression effect also in the book. The book is fascinating, by the way, because you really do have a lot of stories and research.
Well, yeah, the repression effect is real. And the repression effect happens because it's just not very pleasing to acknowledge that something awful may be about to happen. I mean, a lot of us just would rather stick our heads in the sand and sort of turn away from our knowledge of noxious future happenings. Mm-hmm. This repression effect has been demonstrated in what are called online precognition tests, and people can demonstrate that they have prophetic ability on these online experiments, but before horrible events, their ability to do accurate predictions on these tests takes a nosedive. And Dr. Radin, who has pioneered this online precognition approach, has designated this as the repression effect, by which he means that upcoming terrible events interfere with people's ability to perform precognition tests. People, by the way, let me offer a website. People can go to this and take these tests and have a lot of fun doing this. The website is gotpsi.org. I'll spell that. GOTPSI.org. It's GOTPSI.org. There have been millions of people who have taken these tests. The evidence on these tests shows that people can really predict the future. I mean, the odds against chance here are billions and billions against one. This is another solid piece of evidence that people can see the future. So listeners, go to that website and have some fun doing these tests yourself. You can find out something about your own precognitive abilities.
Wonderful. And on that note, because I put it in the chat, but let's say it also for the listeners, your website is Dossey.com?
Yep, it is. Two Dosseys because my wife and I use the same website. So.
Okay. I like that.
It's the first Dossey. It's Dossey.com.
Dossey.com. And, of course, we are talking with Dr. Larry Dossey, and the book we are discussing is The Science of Premonitions, How Knowing the Future Can Help Us Avoid Danger, Maximize Opportunities, and Create a Better Life. And we do have another question in the chat from Light. Does being right brain dominant affect your intuitiveness?
Most people will say yes.
Okay. But I hear...
Yeah, but that's not to say that, only right brain people are good at this. I know many people who are solidly intellectual and analytical and so on who are actually good at it too. I think this is so common that we just might as well, bite the bullet and say that it's open to everybody. I think most of us have this to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, we haven't, I know you've touched on this, but maybe somebody newly coming in the chat room is asking how one can strengthen this ability.
Yeah, I have a long section in the book about how you can become more premonition prone. I'll just mention two methods which I think are very reliable. One is to keep a dream diary. People who write down their dreams immediately on awakening say that this really opens up their dreams in a deeper, wider way. They are more frequent dreamers precognitively, and also they tend to remember premonitions when they do unfold in the future. The other, number one, hands down, best method of becoming better at premonitions, though, is to develop a practice of meditation. There is something about sitting down, shutting up, getting quiet, and just paying attention that makes you more premonition prone. This has been shown in solid research. So those are two methods I just think stand apart from all the others. Keeping a dream diary and being pretty faithful in a practice of meditation.
Mm-hmm. Now let's see. Someone is saying what if they don't remember all their dreams?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that keeping a dream diary is one way to actually enhance remembering dreams. And in any case, those that are frivolous and probably inconsequential, I mean, why would we want to remember those anyway? They might just clutter up our minds. But you can bet your bottom dollar that those that are about events that actually are going to unfold are the ones that are likely to stick in your mind. They are usually extraordinarily vivid. They have a quality, a numinous quality it's been called, that sort of separates them from just frivolous dreams. So I wouldn't worry about not remembering them. If they're about titanic events coming up in the future, it is likely that they are going to stick in your mind and float to the top and be remembered. Anyway.
Yeah. Now, how is this different to lucid dreaming, or is it a component of the premonition?
There's a real crossover here between lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is dreaming and knowing that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. I mean, you're lucid about it. A lot of people who have precognitive dreams describe that they are frequent lucid dreamers. So we see the same sort of we see the crossover here in people's actual experience.
You do. And part of what I'm hearing, too, to just touch back on what you were saying about the, how to open more to this or reinforce this, it sounds like by what you're suggesting to people and through your book is to maybe create a space for this or a willingness.
I think that's exactly right. If you just sort of put the declaration out there, I want to experience this. I want to become more open to this. I want to participate in this. If you just sort of invite premonitions into your life, it is certainly more likely that you're going to experience them. I would urge people not to try to compel premonitions. You can't do that. You cannot manipulate this stuff. In the book, I say that it's more like premonitions do you. You don't do them.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is that although you can't control them, and they will not dance to your tune, you nonetheless can invite them into your life. And I want to underscore that term, invite. So open to them, declare that you want to experience these things, and it is much more likely that you'll do so.
Mm-hmm. And we had another question from Debbie, that some of her premonitions aren't accurate. Some are and some aren't.
I think that's
and
true
I guess,
in any human.
Is that normal?
Well, I think so. You know, an inaccurate premonition, you could argue whether that's a premonition or not. You know, it may seem like one, but it doesn't pan out. So I would have a hard time calling that anything other than a false sense of the future. I wouldn't beat up on myself about having false premonitions. I mean, no human sense is 100% perfect. I mean, we have, for example, we have false memories. We don't even remember the past accurately. False memory syndrome is well known. We make things up. You know, we have false impressions. We don't see things accurately. We don't hear things accurately. Our logic fails us. So why in the world would we beat up on ourselves because we don't remember or we don't foresee the future accurately? I think that inaccuracy is just an unavoidable, ineluctable part of any human capacity, including our sense of the future. So, I think people ought not to be too tough on themselves when they think something really is going to happen and it doesn't turn out to be true. That inaccuracy seems to be part of just who we are. But it's important, I think, to acknowledge that this stuff is real, that we're not making it up. It is not fantasy. The experiments clearly show that this is a human ability, because I think that gives us a richer, deeper, fuller sense of who we are as human beings. You know, a lot of people who have these premonitions that turn out to be uncannily true in camera-like detail often have a sense of epiphany when these things come true. It's like they've seen something about their own inner being, their own abilities as human beings to step outside of space and time in a way that is absolutely transcendently fulfilling. So I think that's one of the main reasons to honor this. It simply gives us a richer view of who we are as human beings.
And it seems, we're in this individual and collective shift, and books like yours are leading perhaps the way, or a guidepost or a sign to that next level of living our potential, more fulfilling the potential by engaging, intuition or premonition, but engaging that part of ourselves or allowing that to engage us, however you want to look at it. But that's my thought on it, that, because if you're doing these studies, it makes it more real for people.
Well, it does.
And, makes it more tangible, and it allows people to be more open to this part of them.
I just want to emphasize this point, and I'm glad you brought it up. The ability to see the future, which is just compellingly demonstrated in these hardcore experiments, gives us an awareness that we're not stuck in the present, and it suggests that there's some part of our being, our consciousness, that is what I call non-local in time. That just means it's infinite in time. It's not confined to the present. We're not stuck in our brains and bodies. We can reach across time. This suggests that something about our consciousness is infinite in time, and if that's so, then that's the equivalent of being immortal or eternal for that aspect of who we are. I think premonitions point like an arrow toward immortality, toward something like the soul. We can call it what we wish. We can call it non-local mind. We can just call it the soul, or we can just say that's extended consciousness or whatever. But it suggests that we're not limited in time. We are more than stuck in the present. We have reaches that are simply not temporally limited. So I think eternality and a sense of immortality is a real payoff for this. And I think this is one of the most important lessons we can glean from Premonitions.
I would agree. Gives more meaning. Thank you so much, Dr. Dossey, for being on the program and sharing your insights on Premonitions.
It was a delight, Michele. Thanks.
Thanks. Welcome anytime. And again, our guest was Dr. Larry Dossey. The book we were discussing is The Science of Premonitions, How Knowing the Future Can Help Us Avoid Danger, Maximize Opportunities, and Create a Better Life. So thank you for being here again with Awakenings. Until next time, continue to share your light and your insight. And until next time, keep awake.